Welcome to the podcast. You're listening to The Privilege of Knowing Animals, the POKA Podcast. Today we're going to talk about birds. Who doesn't love birds? I've got lots of stories. I've got a story about a parakeet, one about a roadrunner, another story about a seagull, and one also about a pigeon. So let's get started. Let's talk about the parakeet. This was a bird that was my bird. And I brought my dog and my bird with me to stay with a friend who lived up in the mountains. And my very first day of having the bird there at her place, I didn't realize she had a lot of cats around. But I was talking with her in her living room when we heard a loud commotion. And I went into the bedroom, and what I discovered was my bird cage on the floor. And the bird, of course, was flapping around and upset and traumatized. And we realized one of her cats had knocked her bird cage onto the floor, trying to get at her. And I felt really bad for the bird. Now, mind you, I'll just tell you this. I've never been a real huge fan of having a bird in a cage. This was a situation. I took the bird off someone's hands, and I just thought maybe I could give it a good home. But I was going to be staying with my friend for a few weeks, and I don't know, it didn't sit well with me. I was afraid I might really scare the bird because of all the cats around. And these were indoor-outdoor, rat-catching, bird-catching cats that would bring things to your doorstep as a thank you and things like that. So one day I just decided, a few days into it, I was going to let the bird go, let him be on his way. Now, I don't know if you know anything about flocks of birds in the Southwest, but there are actually flocks of parakeets, of parrots, and of lovebirds and other birds that escaped, I guess, or got away, and somehow they found each other, and they were in a good environment to survive, I suppose, these tropical birds, and they formed flocks together. I know because I've seen them with my own eyes. I've seen them flying like flocks of parrots, but I've also seen flocks of lovebirds who had taken up residence in a saguaro cactus, like one of those desert cactus that look like a fork, in case you're not familiar with the desert Southwest. And there are a lot of them in the city of Phoenix, for instance, a lot of these lovebirds. And they have perpetuated themselves and stayed around. I can't imagine that many people having lovebirds as pets, but at any rate, I thought maybe this bird could find its flock. So one day I decided to hang his cage under a ramada. It's like a semi-covered little sitting area out in the yard. And it was kind of a ways from the house, a little bit like over there. And I hung it up on a hook, and I opened his door, the door to the cage, and left it open. And I waited for him and waited for him to fly away, and he didn't fly away. And for a good part of the day, he was still in there. And actually, I think, overnight he was in there. The next morning, I woke up and he was still in there. And I thought, maybe I should have a chit-chat with him. So I had a little talk with the bird. I went up to him and I looked up at him, hanging up there, and I said, you can go whenever you want. I know it's a big, scary world out there, but you have your full wings, and you can just step outside of this cage and fly away. And I bet you'll meet up with other parakeets. And, I didn't want to keep a bird in a cage anyway, really, not really. So most of that day went by also. And I stopped watching him. I went about my to-dos, things I needed to do. Ate some dinner around dinner time with my friend. And then I went back to check on him, and he was gone. And I felt so good about that. I did. I felt good about it. I don't know if he made it. I don't know if some other bird made easy prey out of him, because there are lots of birds of prey around in that area. But I just know that I gave a bird with wings his freedom, and that felt good. Because let's face it, it's hard to tame these birds sometimes. I mean, they're wild animals, really. And just the thought of a creature having wings, but being restricted from using their wings to fly, it sounds kind of like this idealist thought, but I just really felt it was wrong. I don't think keeping birds in cages is a good idea. And I'm not judging those who do, certainly not. But I just, when I think about it, it feels wrong. It just feels like if I had wings, I sure wouldn't want them to be trimmed, or I sure wouldn't want to be kept in a cage, that's for sure. And that's a whole different subject. But my bird flew away, and, I've taken some criticism for that, I suppose. But I'm willing to take it. I certainly am. This next story is also a story about being caught and then released. And this took place off the coast of Southern California. My husband and I lived on a sailboat for a long time. And one day we decided to take our boat out sailing, which we did often. So we brought a couple fishing poles, ready to go with us, and decided to maybe try to catch a fish or two. And so my husband, I took the helm of the boat and was steering, and my husband had his fishing pole ready, and he went ahead and cast off the side of the boat. And at the very exact moment that he cast off the boat, I saw a seagull fly by, and it went down to the water at the moment that his hook hit the water, or at the moment it should have hit the water. And I thought to myself, did you just, did he just catch the... And I told him, I said, I think you might have just hooked that bird. And my husband said, no, I don't think so. I said, well, we'll try reeling it in and see what happens. And he started to reel the reel in, and the bird started to come closer to us on the water, and his wing was sticking out sideways. And we realized, oh my gosh, he hooked the bird with his fishing rod. And so we jumped into action. He gently reeled the bird in, and I was trying to coax him and calm him as he got closer. And then as he got up to the boat, my husband was able to reach down and put his hands around the bird, like around his wings, carefully, and bring him into the boat, into the cockpit of the boat. And he did. He got him down in there, and at first the bird was flapping a little bit, but then we were just like, shh, calm down, shh, it's okay. And my husband found the hook, and he was able to get the hook out. It took him a few minutes. The whole time the bird was calm, and this was a large bird, a large seagull, big bird, probably the same size in total mass is probably like a chicken or something. It was a big bird. And he had a big wingspan. He was really beautiful. It was a white seagull with gray wings. And he finally got the hook out of his wing carefully. And then he picked the bird up and set him down in the water. And then the bird shook it off and flew away, which was really cool. That it brings to mind the idea that I think sometimes animals know when humans are trying to help them. I mean, there's umpteen stories like this on the internet about deer or other animals that are wild, and somebody, a trapper or a hunter or somebody going up to them and trying to actually help them, and help them get free of some sort of entanglement or something they've gotten themselves into that has injured them. So it was interesting, the whole thing of how calm the bird was the whole time that he was in the boat with us. And we were really happy with ourselves over that, and we were much more careful in casting our poles when we went fishing after that. Much more careful, making sure that there weren't a lot of birds around. So good ending to a good story. The next story I have to tell is so interesting. We lived in this little cottage at the foot of a mountain. And one day we came home from running around, doing our errands, and we opened the door, and directly opposite of the door, the front door, on the other side of the little cabin, was a window. Well, when we opened the door and brought our stuff in, we looked, and the first thing we saw was a bird sitting on the windowsill on the outside of the window that was opposite of the front door. And this bird was looking directly at us, just glaring at our eyes. And it was a large bird. And this was a roadrunner. Now, I will just say this. Roadrunners are not just cartoon birds. If you're not familiar with the desert Southwest or the Southwest in general, you may not be familiar with the idea that roadrunners are real birds, but they are. And they're quite large birds. They stand a couple feet tall when they stand on the ground, probably, I would say 1 or 2 feet tall. And they have these long tails that stick out kind of straight. And they have these very piercing eyes that look directly at you. They're kind of earthy brown tones, I guess. And this was, a typical roadrunner that you would see around in the Southwest and in Arizona specifically. And so we went, we came into the house and we got everything in, and the roadrunner was still in the windowsill, still staring at us. And I don't know what he was trying to convey or if he was just curious. But I came to find out that there was a business nearby within walking distance. And often the weather in this area was such that you could have your door open during the day and have a nice breeze come through. And come to find out that this place up front there that had this business, they had their door open often. And I guess one day they looked, and in the doorway was this roadrunner standing in the doorway. He stepped to the doorway and he was looking around at everybody like, what's in here? Let me see what's in here. He proceeded to walk over to a toolbox. There was a toolbox sitting there that was open. They were doing some repairs to something in the business. The roadrunner went over and hopped up onto the toolbox and began rifling through the tools. Then, before they knew it, he began removing tools from the toolbox, picking up tools, heavy tools, out of the toolbox, a wrench, a hammer, etc., and dropping them on the floor, maybe almost to make way to look further into the toolbox to see what else might be there, or maybe to see what these things were that were in the toolbox, to feel them. I don't know. And he would come in, and I guess he did this more than once. He would come in, and he would sit somewhere and rifle through things. It was so interesting. He would sit on the desk, he would get up on the computer and perch on the computer. Now, this is a wild bird. And if you know anything about these birds, they're not usually too keen on being around people. You can't get that close to them. In my experience, anyway, you can't get that close to them. And so I was telling them about what happened the day to me, when the bird was in the window. And then that happened more than once also. The bird was sitting in that window more than once. I think he was curious to see what went on inside this building. I'm not really sure. Roadrunners are usually out hunting. They hunt for small prey. They catch little rodents and things, and they have strong beaks that they can grab them up with, and they're really fast. They run fast, and I don't think they go meep or anything like that, but they're really curious and interesting birds, that's for sure. So that's my roadrunner story. And the last story I have for today's episode is about a pigeon. And it's about a human's desire to care for wildlife. I think it's a deep desire to want to help things that are ailing or hurting. One day, I took a walk to the convenience store on the corner to get a Coke or something, and I noticed on the way in there was a pigeon on the ground right in one of the stalls, like where you would pull up to get gas, like in one of the spots. And I went in, I looked at it a little bit, I wondered if it was struggling, but I went in and I got what I wanted to get, and I came back out. When I came back out, the pigeon was a little further across the gas area, but he looked worse. He was laying down on the ground further, and he just looked like he was in distress. And I thought, he's going to get run over right there. It'll just be terrible. So there was somebody standing nearby, and I said, will you just don't let anybody pull up right there? I'll be right back. And I ran to my house, and I got a shoebox and a towel, and I came back, and I went up to the pigeon carefully, and I said, it's okay, and I gently picked him up, put a towel around him, and put him in the box. And I walked him home. And I got a little dropper because we had recently had kittens that we were raising, and I tried to feed him water. And he took a little bit of water, but not much. And so I made him as comfortable as I could. And my husband had him sitting there, and he just picked him right up and was petting him. And he's like that. He's not afraid of any kind of picking up anything. And I came back in the room a while later, and my husband had a tear in his eye, and I said, "What's wrong?" And he said, "He died." And I felt really sad, really sad. We just sort of sat there and cried. Maybe we had other things that needed to be cried about, I don't know. But I will say this, that, I feel like we have a need to help things and others. Sometimes I think maybe it's because we don't do enough of it in our own lives. We don't help ourselves enough. I'm not sure, but maybe helping some struggling bird or other animal will somehow fill that void. Maybe, I'm sure that you could think of a lot of reasons, philosophies for that, but it was a little sadder than really you would think it would be. It was. We took the bird and we put him outside and buried him the next day. So it was one tiny little life, and we didn't catch it in time. But hopefully he died in peace and not, in horror on some concrete where some car drove over him. But I know there are whole bird sanctuaries where people bring birds in all the time. People that have never touched birds or have no idea why they picked that bird up and brought it in. But, it happens. So, anyway, this has been another delightful little episode of the POKA Podcast, the privilege of knowing animals. Until next time.